Welcome to Plan Giving 101, Spiritual Acts from the Heart webinar in conjunction with the 2021 Sprunt Lecture Series featuring presentations from financial experts from across the country on plan giving, legacy gifts, and more. Our forum is sponsored by the Advancement Office and the Alumni Office at Union Presbyterian Seminary. Next slide, please. And Union's new Master of Arts in Public Theology degree program. Are you called to be a Christian leader in the public square? Know someone considering theological education? Contact our admissions directors at admissions@upsem.edu. Our panelists are Carl Madison, Vice President of Planned Giving Resources for the Presbyterian Foundation. Nancy Norelli, Attorney, Federal Mediator, Estates and Guardianship Mediator, Founder, and Principal Attorney at Norelli Law. Our panelists are Joseph Rodd, Senior Counsel for Morton and Geddes Law Firm. Our host and moderator is Olanda Carr Jr., Senior Ministry Relations Officer of the Presbyterian Foundation East Region. Olanda, over to you.
My name is Olanda Carr, and I am, as mentioned, the Senior Ministry Relations Officer for the Presbyterian Foundation. In this capacity, I work with multiple congregations and individuals in all areas of stewardship and generosity, including planned giving. Planned giving relates to gifts made through the estate and wills planning process to often benefit a charitable organization. Today, we will be exploring the planned giving topic a bit with a few industry professionals. Each has worked in planned giving for multiple years and will therefore be able to address the various aspects one should consider when creating a planned gift. After a series of questions to the panelists, we will have an opportunity at the end to answer questions from the audience. To begin, I would like to take a moment of pause for the panelists we have with us today to introduce themselves. I would like to start with Nancy Norelli. Please tell us a bit about yourself.
I will. Thank you. I'm delighted to be here. I am a lifelong Presbyterian, and sometimes it seems like I've been a lifelong attorney also. I started practicing way back in 1977, spent 10 years on the district court bench, which is a North Carolina court where it's the People's Court, and then returned to private practice where I work with fiduciaries. I also am involved where there's a controversy in an estate or in a family, and I particularly enjoy mediating cases like that to find the sweet spot where a family can move on past issues involving money, usually.
Thank you. Joe, tell us a bit about yourself.
Happy to. Thank you, Orlando. My name is Joe Radd. I'm an estate planning attorney in Rock Hill, South Carolina. For the past 39 years, I've concentrated my law practice in the area of personal estate planning. I work with individuals of all ages and from all walks of life. I focus on wills, trusts, powers of attorney, both financial and medical, estate tax planning, and probate avoidance.
Thank you so much. And Carl.
Thanks, Landa. My name is Carl Madison, Vice President for Planned Giving Resources at the Presbyterian Foundation. I would say my passion here is really to learn from churches and from planned givers about what are the great ideas out there so that we can share with others. I love working on planned giving programs and especially learning about people's inspiration for making planned gifts. And I guess my value added as a lifelong Presbyterian is to try to get people really thinking about their legacy and how to make that happen. So I'm really thrilled to be here today with you all. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, and real thrilled that you're here as well. One of the great things about virtual events is that we have the opportunity to see who's in the virtual room with us. Feel free to drop a chat and let us know your name and perhaps your area of interest with Plan Giving. Perhaps if you have worked with Plan Giving in the past or things of that nature, we would love to know that information. At this time, to get us started, I'm going to ask each panelist one question. If each of you could respond with, given your area of expertise or area where you have worked the most, give us a brief overview of Plan Giving or legacy giving as you see it. And I'll start that first with Nancy.
Well, Plan Giving can mean a wide range of ways that you might honor a charity of your choice, present a legacy gift, help your children understand what long-term giving is all about. It's not just writing a check. It's about making a gift that will last to a charity, to a charitable organization, and to, as part of that, improve society, and also perhaps give your family an opportunity to learn what it really means to have this spiritual giving that we're talking about today.
Thank you. Joe, same question, please.
Sure. Planned giving or legacy giving, or as we used to call it, charitable giving, is really for many clients an integral part of their estate plan. The degree to which a client desires to engage in planned giving can range from a simple bequest in a will or trust to, for example, a very wealthy client of mine who directed that his entire estate pass to one or more charitable organizations. I will readily admit, with the increase in the estate tax exemption, which is now $11.7 million per person, the number of clients engaging in charitable giving has declined significantly. Many of you may recall the charitable remainder trust that was very popular in the 1990s. In my experience with clients, these have basically disappeared. But what I am seeing in the past 5 years or so is a renewed interest in charitable giving, although the method is quite different. The donor advised fund has made a big impact on a person's ability to give to charity during life or at death without incurring the large administrative burdens of creating their own private foundation. Community foundations are another often used means for clients to make charitable contributions effortlessly. I'm also seeing clients who are beginning to realize the tremendous impact income tax burden now imposed on retirement accounts through the Secure Act, which was passed in January of, which became effective in January of 2020. This has become another area where clients are opting to leave funds to charity rather than have the account demolished by taxes. Last, I would say, when considering planned gift giving, think outside the box and consider alternative ways to make the transfer, such as gifts of stock with low basis, a qualified charitable contribution from an IRA, naming a charity as beneficiary of a retirement account, or making the charity a transfer on death or pay on death recipient of a non-retirement account. The money gets to the organization much faster and much easier than a simple bequest in a will or trust.
Thank you so much, Joe. And Carl, if I could have you respond to that same question, please.
I'd be delighted to. I really appreciate those previous two answers, and I would almost just want to echo those. But I'd love to share a little bit with some accumulated, I guess, experience I've had since I transferred from the financial services industry over into planned giving many, many, many years ago. What's planned giving all about? The single greatest planned giving lesson that I ever learned was from an accidental teacher, if you will. And this lesson's really been my guide star for everything I do when I say or think about planned giving and legacy giving. And perhaps later we might even differentiate those two. There's crossover, but so I'll share this story. It's a story of a meeting I had with a donor. Again, early in my planned giving career, her name was Wilhelmina, and she was in her late 90s and increasingly frail. But the first time I met her, I saw just this beautiful spirit, just full of joy despite quickly failing health. And she had a very strong faith. And I chatted with her at her bedside in her garden room. And she was bright. She was surrounded by these tomes of books on ancient gardens, most of which she wrote. She was a PhD in that kind of thing. Just the most interesting person to be around. And as our conversation wandered, eventually we got around to her charitable trusts that she and her late husband had established. And she asked some, I would say, vague questions about those trusts. And I gave some vague answers because we were really talking about her passing, her death that was imminent. And it was really hard for me because I took a real liking to Wilhelmina. And I had to mention a very difficult topic, which was difficult territory for me. And she saw it was difficult for me, and she kind of clapped her hands and said, "What happens when I die?" And I said, "Your trusts are going to convert into some fairly major gifts that look like this." I handed her some paper and said, "When you die, this is what's going to happen at your church into these scholarships. This is how much will go in." And I thought I had just told her for the first time she was on this final journey, but she just looked over into her garden and smiled and just stared. She just smiled the whole time. And I had to process this. I didn't give her bad news like I thought I did. I brought her some real joy. She and her husband, Stanley, had dreamed about this. They were dreaming about what comes next after their life. And they planned for it. They planned very, very carefully for it so that this would happen. And all I did was prove to her that it was going to come true. And so she was envisioning, after her lifetime, all these resources that are supporting her and had supported Stanley were going to go into this ministry that was, for her, beyond words. That gave her enough joy that the end for her was not an end. It was this new beginning that she and Stanley were going to change people's lives. And it's been numerous. This gift happened years ago. And it is constantly churning out amazing students through her church. That's the perfect planned gift. It's continuing to do this ministry or these great things. It's what happens next. And this field of planned giving is very technical and transactional. And I love that because from my banking days, that's what I think I'm probably better at, and I can hold on to, and it's quantifiable. It's like math, when you're finished. But the thing that I learned there from Wilhelmina is that there's a capstone to the perfect planned gift. We've done the transaction, but we have to leave our message, because without it, we've left asset, we've left money. And I get to watch through the years people who've left money and said what it's meant to them, what the place has meant to them, and what they hope that it's going to mean. And that's when it turns into legacy. A planned gift is transactional. To me, a legacy gift is when we turn it into what's next for us, so that the people we care about the most hear that. And that comes from all of the stuff that we accumulate, like all of our things that we're sitting in right now, our home, our furniture, we're driving our cars, the retirement accounts that we're talking about. Those are all things that we're saving or using. And that's about 95% of what we all kind of own at one snapshot in time. 95% we're kind of sitting on it. But one day, that 95%, each one of us is going to have to point that in a new direction. And we get to choose what we want that to do on our behalf afterwards. And that's when this gets kind of exciting. And if we don't turn it into our legacy, it's going to go where, I guess, the state has a plan. And it might do okay, but it might not be what makes your heart sing. And that's when we need to call in some family or some friends or someone from, an organization that we care deeply about. Talk to them what makes our heart sing, and what am I going to do with this stuff to make it sing after my lifetime. So that's planned giving to me. That's kind of the lesson I learned from Wilhelmina.
Well, thank you so much. That is a wonderful story. I love that you highlighted what is our message that we are leaving. I really like that. Nancy, did you want to respond to that, or you want us to go to our next question? I thought I saw you ready to respond.
Well, I did. I did love that story. And I will tell you, the clients I love the most are the ones who have a big heart and a charity, and they want to do something. It was a decade ago, but I had a minister of music, and his wife was an organist, and they came to see me for estate planning. They had 3 adult children, and they said, "We want to leave everything to charity. Our children are fine. They don't need any of this money." Well, being what their professions were, it wasn't a big estate. So the tax planner and me said, "Well, you can do that, but there's no tax reason to do that." So as I talked to them more and learned about their children, sure, we could have done a donor advised fund, but again, that's complicated and cost some lawyer time. And what we did was just ask the children they said, "We're going to leave you each a third of the estate, and we want you to leave it to a charity that you think is important to do in our memory." And that worked just perfectly. And because it was a wonderful, now not every family would that work, but because you just kind of knew as the counselor that they had the children do, it was a great solution for them.
Wonderful story. Yeah, I definitely think that's a strong message, because sometimes we assume that the estate planning process is for the very large estates, but it's really something that all of us can consider. So thank you for sharing that. Nancy, if I could ask you actually this question, what is the best way for us to get started in thinking about planned giving or legacy giving?
Really, I think that's where I have my counselor hat on. I sometimes meet with families who haven't thought about making a charitable gift. They worried that will we have anything to leave behind to our children if we need long-term care? And I say, no, well, let's think about it. What has been important in your life, and what would you want to help sustain? And what messages do you want to send to your children? Because we actually can involve children in this process at a very, very young age. And for them to just begin thinking about it. And it takes a while, especially if you want to use some of the fancier devices that Joe alluded to. You got to figure out what you want to, what the object of the charity is. Do you want a remainder trust or annuity trust? And then you have to get it drafted, and you have to look at that. So it can be a process that takes some time. But the starting point is to help bring the person along to say, yeah, I really would like to do a scholarship. A scholarship, an endowed scholarship fund. I did that recently for a history teacher. A middle school history teacher had passed away, and his wife said, "I want the poor kids to be able to go to college." He had kids who said, "Teacher, where's Egypt?" And they were saying they didn't know how to pronounce Egypt. And he wanted those kids to have a chance to get some scholarship money. So that was perfect. My family set up a scholarship in my mother's memory 35 years ago. And I still love to hear from those kids that win the scholarship based upon an essay. And so just sharing personal stories, like we've done some here today, helps get people thinking about it. And So the first thing is think about what you want to sustain. And the second thing is how much money do you what portion of your estate do you want to set aside for that? And then somewhere along the line, we'll talk about taxes. But I refuse to let that tax tail wag the dog. Just tell me what you want to do, and we'll find the most tax advantaged way to do it. It might be the simplicity of having your children make charitable gifts and out of their retirement accounts, or it might be a complicated charitable remainder trust, which what I'm reading, Joe, I think that vehicle is going to come back again because of some of the new proposed tax laws. So we might as well just lay it out there for everybody right now. There are some proposals that are sweeping changes. Some commentators say it is the most ambitious and sweeping change that we've seen in our lifetimes. Now, that doesn't mean it'll all come to pass, but I will say to everyone, if you think you've been thinking about doing a bit of some sort of charitable trust, or trying to figure out how to manage your estate plan where you can take care of your family and also your charitable wishes, call your lawyer now. It's going to get really busy this year as we try to, and there are ways to draft around the unknown. They're not perfect ways, right, Joe? But we've got some opportunities there. And the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, Forbes, they're all talking about what this is going to mean. And just on a final note about charities and choices, I helped a family over 22 years ago set up a charitable remainder trust. And with that device, you get income for a set number of years, and for them it was 20 years. And then the remaining assets pass to charity. You get a tax deduction when you set it up, which is quite wonderful. And I got to close one. I don't know how many you've closed, Joe, but that one I saw to the very end where it pays out to the charity. And that was such an exciting moment for that family. The husband had already died and the wife died 2 months later when it finally paid out to a private day school that was their object of their bounty. So, not to talk too long, back to you, Mr. Moderator.
No, thank you for sharing. That was wonderful. Before we continue with our next question, any responses to what Nancy has shared? Sure, Joe.
I was just going to say, from what Carl and Nancy both have said, one of the downsides, I guess, of being the transactional part of the planned gift is you don't always get to see the ultimate disposition of the funds. So in the cases where both of you have actually seen, firsthand what happens to the gift in its final resting place, so to speak, I envy you for that. It's an advantage that I don't often have.
Yeah. Well,
prerequisites.
It's the best part of the job. We should probably just be sending you those kinds of follow-ups. I really do encourage people to write down something, because oftentimes, loved ones do like to have the story, but the rest of us do too. And especially those who are peripheral. I'm often peripheral as well. And to see those stories, you never forget. It's been 15 years. And I tell Wilhelmina's story, and I hope it changes people. So we should all be better about sharing it with others who have helped, because it's I get a little bit, I hate to admit this, but I get a little bit weepy every time I tell the story. It's hard to see on screen.
Yeah. Well, speaking of telling the story, one of the pieces of the storytelling process of coming up with our estate plan is, of course, that scary word of the will. We hear that quite often. And I was wondering, Joe, if you could just help us a bit with that. What happens if we die without a will?
Well, the answer, Orlando, is the same answer I give to everyone. That just should simply not happen. For anyone, as I say, for anyone that has assets that are greater than what it costs to prepare a will, you should have a will. Now, I know practically speaking, that's not going to happen, So here's my nutshell of what happens. First of all, every state has laws that essentially make a will for you. Most provide that the deceased person's estate is divided among the next of kin. For example, in South Carolina, that's spouse and children. So this often presents problems with real estate ownership. For example, if a spouse has, or a couple has 50-50 ownership of their property, and one of them passes away, then the half belonging to the deceased spouse gets redistributed to the surviving spouse and the surviving children. So you end up with a 75-25 ownership. Now, maybe works, maybe not. But what if the child's 2 years old? Then you've got issues with the minor child owning property and conservatorships, guardianships, and court appearances and things like that. So without saying much more about it, let's just make sure that doesn't happen, or happens very rarely, I should say.
I like that perspective. Let's just not do it, right?
That's
any
right.
other comments about that or from the panelists?
A brief one. In North Carolina, sometimes there's nobody out there on the family tree. Mm-hmm. And unless it's changed and I've missed it, in North Carolina, if there's nobody on that family tree out certain degrees, it is cheats to the University of North Carolina. That might not be if you're a Dookie. That might not be.
That's definitely not your plan going into it, is it, Nancy?
Exactly.
And from an NC State guy, I'm not sure how I feel about that, Nancy. But
exactly. Make your will.
I see.
Make your will, right.
All right. Well, I'm wondering if I could ask Carl this question. What are the different kinds of legacy gifts? I know you alluded to that a little earlier, but I would like for you to expound if you could.
Yeah, thanks. You know what? I'm going to precede this with that disclaimer that I don't want to forget to say afterwards. And I think Joe and Nancy are probably much more, I think, familiar with the disclaimer that we should say and why. But anything that I'm going to mention in just a second is important to connect and consult with people who really know their stuff, your advisors. And if you don't have one, you should get one, because many of these gifts I'll mention, I'm going to say are easy. But the fact is, while they might be easy, there are sometimes some consequences of doing something without thinking about the whole plan. And working with someone who's done it before, even if it's not a complicated tax thing on the surface, there are ways that your whole financial plan fits together that is really helpful to have someone who is a professional at it and has seen a lot of different things with the way that small movements of your assets can impact each other. Wow, well, that's a long way of saying don't ever leave out your professional advisors, because it's really important for these types of gifts not to knock anything out unexpectedly, or and especially to be written correctly. Like the things Joe has mentioned, and Nancy, about the charitable remainder trust, the will. I mean, you need someone who knows their stuff, especially with tax changes coming up. It's not a time to think you know exactly how this is going to play out. So having someone who's done it before is incredibly helpful. A long prologue, and I hope Joe and Nancy will add something if I forgot it or understated it later. But I'll just say that the types of legacy gifts are so many that it's like going to a big candy store that's fully stocked, and it can be overwhelming. But it's really actually not as daunting, because once you figure out what are the assets that you and your family have and what you want to do, there's not very many options for each one of us individually. We're really not looking at all of the caramels and chocolates. We might, whatever our situation is, might be just kind of like jawbreakers. I don't know. There's just, usually it gets narrowed down without you having to do too much thinking. But I wanted to just highlight a couple of the biggest, most popular ones. And put them in two categories. One is gifts later, after our lifetime, which is what we usually think about. And then some that you can start now, because it's potentially a good idea for many of us. Gifts after our lifetime, most of us know about a bequest. It's a gift left to an organization after your lifetime. It can be in, the entire estate. It can be what's left over after all other obligations are met. It can be a percentage. There's lots of different ways to do it. And it's the most obvious, it's the most common. And I would say that, I don't know, Joe and Nancy, it might be 90% people will say or more of planned gifts or bequests. I don't know if that's true, but that's a figure that I've seen and heard. The other one that's a gift after a lifetime is a gift of retirement accounts, qualified retirement accounts like an IRA. It's a really bright one because those are often the heaviest taxed assets in an estate, especially if you get it with estate tax, which might be a bigger issue. Going to a nonprofit is probably the most tax efficient thing to give to an organization, whereas heirs might receive something that's less serious listening. Sorry. It's something that you might want to give heirs something that's less hit by taxes. So those are two that are pretty good ideas to consider. But then there's many of us, if we have the opportunity, might want to start our planned gift now. Planned gift doesn't mean it has to be after your lifetime. There's things like we've just talked about, the charitable remainder trust. Someone can make that gift to a trust that their attorney or trust company helps establish, get those tax benefits now, and pay them an income for life, and then, or for a set period of time. And afterwards, whatever is left from the investments and payouts and things like that goes to the organization. And it's a wonderful way to get all these benefits and have a gift at the end. But the one I find really exciting right now is that donor advised fund. It's a way you can give now. It's this gift that can fit many people now and fit on through after their lifetime. It's this one single tool where many people are now using a donor advised fund to do all of their giving. You put one appreciated asset or just a few in, and then all of your gifts go out from there. You advise that fund to give to these organizations, and it writes all those checks. So it's really efficient tax-wise, but also keeping track of it. And then after your lifetime, it gets to keep giving. Whether your family or your family as advisors might decide who get the gifts, or you might set something up that says, well, I want to continue to give to my church and to Union Seminary every year. And those will keep coming in every year because that's how the fund gets established. But those are some pretty common ones from where I sit and stand. And I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but I'd love to hear if Joe or Nancy have others. I didn't want to go into too much depth. I want to do some big ones. Are those? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Nancy.
Yeah, I love donor advised funds also. And the other very useful thing about the donor advised fund is with many of us having to use the standard deduction rather than itemizing deductions. Sometimes you can clump a lot of your charitable giving into 1 year and get a better pop. I see Joe nodding his head. It's called clumping. And once it's in that donor advised fund, the charity doesn't get it right away. You can put, my church can get this year's pledge and then next year's pledge and maybe even the next year's pledge, but it's given in the future. So I really am a big fan of the donor advised funds, and there's lots. Is there such a vehicle at the foundation now?
Yes, there is.
Excellent. So that punch on your website and you'd be able to find out about it. And the advantage of that is the income that's thrown off from that would then go back to the foundation. So you can choose your donor advised fund, and it's kind of a win-win. Am I correctly stating that?
Yes, you are. And you are correct also that if you would like to learn more about that, of course, our website has information, and we'd be more than happy to work with anyone on the call to learn more about that.
And you wouldn't even have to hire a lawyer to help set up a donor advised fund. Orlando can help you do that, and it just happens, and you can write your check at the end of the year, and or donate the appreciated stock, as we've discussed also.
Very good.
Some funds will even accept real estate. Orlando, do you all accept real estate?
We will work with you, yes. There are processes, as we've mentioned before. I think the tag phrase, it's complicated. One thing that you have mentioned, we are, of course, a denominational agency. So we have colleagues all over the country. So depending on where you live, it may or may not be me. It could be one of my wonderful colleagues that could assist you. But yes, we definitely have ways to help you with this conversation and to explore the various ways you can do that. While we're on processes, if I could just move us along just a bit, I did have a question from the audience I thought would relate to this conversation. And so I wanted to kind of throw that in there. Someone is asking thoughts about having a living trust as opposed to a conventional will. And I know I've attended a couple of events that have, discussed the pros and cons of each, but I would love for someone on the panel to respond to that. Maybe Joe, do you have any thoughts about that initially?
Sure, I'd be happy to. With any planning, whether it's just conventional estate planning or planned giving or charitable giving, I always start with the simple rule: think simple first. For example, on the planned giving side, I had a client who wanted to put a charitable bequest in their will because the church needed something almost immediately. And I said, well, why do it in your will? Why don't you just write a check to the church now? She said, oh, well, can I do that? And I said, sure, you can do that. So that's the simple answer. So the same with a living trust. If the living trust will simplify your estate plan, I'm all for it. But I often find that many people can obtain their objectives, which primarily is probate avoidance, by doing other things like naming beneficiaries or putting TOD or POD. And they end up with a living trust that just has a house in it. So they've spent all this money to create the living trust and convey their house to the trust, and they've saved, $500 or $600 in probate fee, but it's cost them maybe $2,500 to create the trust. So be practical about it. Think simple first, and even get a second opinion. I mean, I'm all for that too. So that's my short and sweet on just simple planning and estate planning.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts about this question we have before us?
I totally agree with Joe. I totally agree. And if you leave a few assets that you don't get moved, then you got to probate anyway. So it really does. It really was a lose-lose. But again, your advisor knows when it's right for a person. You know when it's right. And so listen to your advisor would be my strong advice there.
Nancy, I'm wondering if we could, one thing that you brought up earlier that I would like to highlight just a bit, that sometimes folks assume this is not for me. So I'm going to ask you this question, and I think I know your response, but I want to ask you this. If I am not wealthy, why do I need to have an estate plan?
Well, there's lots of reasons, so many reasons. And I do a lot of free wills for pro bono clients that are referred to me by legal services. And frequently they're the people that really need them because they may have a child with special needs, or they may have a son with a drug problem. And having them acquire property, even $500, is going to be a problem. For young couples, wills are so important because you get to say who should be the guardian of your children and trustee of funds that might come into their hands. We all think we're going to live forever and that mom and dad will die first, but we don't know. The worst case scenario, I always say, what if the furnace blows up while you're having Thanksgiving dinner? Who are the contingent beneficiaries that should take your property? Most likely charities, if I can get people to even bring their mind to that point. Again, you also, you're making the plan, your administrator, executor, whatever they might be called in your state, doesn't have to post bond. You can waive that whole posting of bond and save some money there. You can, when you're talking to that person, remember they're a counselor. They're not just a draftsperson, a draftsman. They are a counselor and can help you figure out what's a plan for my son who's 30 and has a serious drug problem. How wonderful to have a counselor help you figure that out. How about if he gets his act together after you die? You still don't want him to get anything? Can there be some test we can put in a trust that if he can present, pay stubs or 1099s and a clean drug test for 3 months, maybe he should get some money then. But that's the kind of chat that a counselor can have. So it's more than just pushing money around or dollar signs. It's getting you to a place where you can complete an estate plan, tie a ribbon around it, and not worry anymore.
Thank you so much. Other comments about that from the panelists? Okay, Nancy said it all. Perfect. All right. Joe, I'm going to come to you for actually two things. That's my warning for you. So the first one, if you could just speak very briefly. We've said this a couple of times, but I think it's good to reiterate the importance of understanding the tax law implications to your estate plan.
Well, I like to use the estate of Elvis Presley as an example. In 1977, when Elvis died, some believe he had made during his lifetime well over $1 billion in income revenue, but he died with an estate of about 10 million. And the estate tax rate at that time, believe it or not, was 70%. So of his $10 million, roughly 7 million went to estate taxes. Now, his estate was left with one asset, which was his mansion at Graceland, which is now worth probably over $100 million. But I tell it because it illustrates the point that the estate tax is it's a cruel, punitive tax that just can devastate a family business or a family farm or an estate that's illiquid. And, I just hope that Congress, in its wisdom, doesn't see the need to bring that back at any level below where we are now, which is roughly for an individual 11.7 million or 23.4 for a couple, because it is a very punitive tax, and I think just a tax that is so harsh when it's imposed.
Absolutely. Before I give Joe his part two, any other comments about the importance of tax? I love that example, Joe. I had never really heard that about Elvis's estate, so thank you for sharing that. Seeing none, I kind of wanted to stay in a similar area, and Joe and Nancy both feel free to respond. A question from the audience about legalities. An alum of the seminary wanted to know this. Currently lives in California. Is it best to use an attorney in California rather than from North Carolina or Florida, where I lived previously?
Joe, that one's easy, so I'll take it. You can get this harder question about IRA.
I was hoping you were going to say that.
Yeah, I'll take the easy one. Low-hanging fruit. Talk to a practitioner in California. Now, your old attorney in Florida could perhaps refer you to someone if you've got an old Florida will. First step is to have the California attorney review that to see if it works well in California. But yeah, we're not going to write any California wills, are we, Joe?
No. Just tell us we're loved. That's all we need.
That's right.
All righty. Well, I'm going to end the questions that we have with Carl. One last question for you, and then we'll take a few more from the audience. You've spoken beautifully already about this a bit, but if you would like to share more about the importance of leaving a gift to an organization that you care deeply about, or supporting a mission that you passionately want to persist into the future. Why is that important?
Oh, thank you for this. I won't pass this one to Joe or Nancy. I'll keep the easier ones. Thanks. This is a great question, and I want to address that from two perspectives: the importance to me, the giver, and the importance also to the organization. So I'll say for me, the giver, the planned gift is usually that game changer gift for us. It's the biggest gift most of us will ever make. It's usually the one that we give that doesn't just fund operations, like whenever we make an annual gift somewhere. That's more operational. But this is a significantly larger gift on average, and so it's more transgenerational. It's more like a gift maybe to an endowment or a gift for scholarships, or it's something that we want to do something in the future that we want to continue to be. So we're passing future generations this energy. We're giving them, who follow, something to use for their work, just like someone before us did this for us. I mean, we didn't do everything on our own. We're really the beneficiaries of so much work from others. And it's really a great opportunity for us to be that to someone else. And then finding that place that you dearly love, or those places that you dearly love, and thinking, how can I keep working here, even after I'm gone? So that's a great thing for the giver to really think about. And I would invite everyone to think deeply about where it is that makes your heart sing, and how do you want to be part of that? Because it's not going to happen if you don't plan it. And so for the receiver, for the organization receiving that wonderful, wonderful gift, it's often going to this financial base that carries this organization through hard times. It is stabilizing during times of crisis. The past year, perhaps, I think many of the organizations we care most about have really suffered. People haven't been on campus or inside of the buildings, and we have to keep those things going in hard times. And this is where we get the ballast for the ship to get through these hard storms. We can keep plowing through those waves and come out on the other side and then serve the way we were serving before. And so that's what the benefit of these gifts are. It's not to get rich. It's not for us to have more money in our organizations. It's for us to have ballast, and also to think through, how do we adapt, because things change, and how do we be what we're going to be next? This is a way that what we have in our organizations, investment capital, to say we need to be this to our community. And so those are the two things that kind of excite me. It's great for the givers. It's our game-changing moment. And it's amazing for the organization because we can make it possible as a group. We all together can keep doing this, whatever it is that makes your heart sing, for whoever follows us, just like it was done for us.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you for that. I'm going to add makes my heart sing / makes Carl weepy. And I think if I can combine those two questions, that's a great way to begin the process. We do have a couple of questions from the audience. And first, I would like to say thank you again to all of the panelists. Your answers have been wonderful. I have learned a lot already this afternoon. But if I could ask you just a few more. One, can you use an IRA to give to a donor-advised fund? And who would like to answer that? I think Nancy was trying to throw that to Joe earlier. I'm not sure.
That's going.
When I saw that pop up, something tells me that you cannot make a qualified charitable contribution to a donor-advised fund. I'd have to. Is that correct, Carl?
You cannot.
Okay, so
it has to go directly to.
Okay, so has to go directly to the charity. Okay, so I think that answers our question.
Yeah. So I think that
you can take the money out of the IRA and contribute it to a charity, but I don't think you can take it out of the IRA as a qualified charitable contribution and then put it into the DAF.
Gotcha. Well, that is very helpful. And as a reminder, lots of good information can be found, of course, on Union's website. Mm-hmm. That's going to be posted for you, as well as we do touch on IRA giving on the foundation website as well. Nancy, did I see you?
Yes, I don't think we've fully articulated this today, but for those of us who are old and have to have required minimum distribution out of our retirement accounts, it's just such a wonderful way to make a charitable gift, because you can that when you give to charity, it counts toward that. You just keep track of it yourself, and it's one of the few sort of bennies that are really left out there in income tax planning for just folks these days.
Wonderful. Well, since you brought that topic up, Nancy, about age, I do have a question relating to age in the chat from the audience. The seminary is facing a generational divide regarding giving, especially planned giving. How do we broach this topic for our younger alums?
Wow. Well, you're never too young to start. That's for darn sure.
Mhm.
You know, they worry. They worry a lot about all of the needs in their life down the road. But I'm sure you all have the research that if you start giving just a little bit, you'll keep on giving. And then at some point, maybe that would turn into a planned gift. I think telling anecdotal stories like we had today can be very, very powerful, which is another reason to make a planned gift. If not inspiring the next generation in your family, the organizations publish those gifts that have been made and the purpose of those gifts. And that inspires other people. Maybe they hadn't thought about doing a Voice of Democracy scholarship. And I do encourage all the folks who are listening, who are running foundations or development officers, make sure where your donors are willing, pat them on the back and tell the stories. And I'm sure you do. And maybe it's finding that key young person that we've identified some in our church that are just amazing, that can become the inspiration for other young people. I think it's an elephant which you have to eat one bite at a time.
Gotcha. Definitely makes sense. And Carl, I think you were ready to chime in as well.
Well, I think it's a challenge that many places are struggling with. And I think Nancy said it well. I didn't mean to look like I have something. I'm just nodding because I was thinking, yes, this is something we all need to talk about. And I think Nancy was driving at these very important points. And I would also say it's time, if we haven't, to try to get them into leadership. Nancy mentioned tapping young members of a church to engage and to get them thinking about it. And that's where I first got introduced to the whole topic of planned giving. Was I was tapped to talk about planned giving for young families. How do we get people to think about the topic? And so just that invitation to start including them is a great idea. Hard to do. I wish there was an easy answer.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to play the lightning round here. If you can think of a parting sentence or a phrase that you would like to leave the audience with today in this topic, what would that be? And I'll go around our virtual room for that. Joe, we'll start with you. What final words of wisdom can you share with us?
Keep it simple. Give from the heart and think now. Charities need money now, and anything you can do to help them with that and do it in a simple way always works best.
Amen. Carl.
I would say that I would challenge everyone to think about what makes your heart sing and what matters so much to you that in your absence, you want it to thrive, and then plan for that. What can you do to make sure that what you care about so deeply thrives? How are you going to make that something a part when you're not here, whether it's for temporary absence or longer?
That's wonderful.
Wonderful. And Nancy.
Well, the Lord loves a cheerful giver, and it does make you joyful and happy.
Powerful words. Yes. Well, I would like to thank all that joined us today. This has been wonderful. And I know the times that I have worked with Carl and others on planned giving, that it generally prompts more questions. It's just enough to get you thinking and to get started. So I would like to say this: if there are other questions that come up, definitely feel free to contact Richard Wong at the seminary, Union Seminary. He's more than happy to help you with additional questions, as well as you can find information on their website, and definitely able to continue the conversation of learning more about ways that you too can leave a planned gift. From that, I will close out and turn it back over to my trusty colleagues.
Thank you, Reverend Carr, and thank you for watching. If you registered for the forum, please share your thoughts by taking a 2-minute survey at the end of the broadcast, which will be emailed to you. We hope you'll join us for this evening's lecture, Renunciation, by Dr. Ted Smith, Professor of Preaching and Ethics at the Candler School of Theology at Emory University. We also hope you'll join us for tomorrow's events as we conclude the 2021 Sprunt Lecture Series. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day.